In 53 BC, the Battle of Carrhae raged under the blistering Mesopotamian sun. Crassus led a formidable force, about 35,000 to 40,000 legionaries. These heavy infantry were the main character of the Roman military, renowned for their discipline and close combat prowess. They fought in tight formations with large shields, scutum, and short swords gladius, designed to create an impenetrable wall of steel. Alongside the legionaries were around 4,000 to 5,000 cavalry and some auxiliary troops, including archers. Crassus positioned his troops in a traditional Roman battle formation, a solid block of infantry supported by cavalry on the flanks. With their shields interlocked in a formidable formation, they stood ready to take on what they believed was a smaller, less organized Parthian force. Facing the Romans was a smaller but highly skilled Parthian force. Surena, their general, commanded approximately 10,000 troops, primarily composed of two types of cavalry: horse archers and cataphracts. The horse archers were the stars of the Parthian army, mobile and deadly accurate. They could shoot arrows while riding at full speed, a tactic that bewildered and decimated many enemies. The cataphracts, on the other hand, were the heavy cavalry, clad in armor from head to toe and capable of devastating charges. As the two sides prepared to clash, Surena had a clever trick up his sleeve. He concealed his numbers by hiding the depth of his army behind the width of an advanced guard, making his army appear much smaller than it actually was. The Romans thought they were facing a relatively small contingent, which gave them a false sense of confidence. But then Surena played his next card to really throw the Romans off balance. The Parthians filled the plain with the deafening beat of kettle drums. Plutarch, the ancient historian, described the sound as like the bellowing of beasts mixed with sounds resembling thunder. That eerie, thunderous roar, echoing across the plain, was designed to unsettle even the steadiest of soldiers. As the Romans advanced, thinking they had the measure of their opponents, Surena's cavalry added another layer to the deception. Before the Romans got too close, the Parthian horsemen covered their armor with skins and robes, concealing their true strength. The Romans saw a ragtag group, not the fearsome warriors they were about to face. Then came the moment of revelation. As the Romans drew nearer, the Parthians suddenly spread out and shed their coverings. Imagine the shock on the Romans' faces as they saw the Parthian cavalry in all their glory, blazing in helmets and breastplates, their margin steel glittering keen and bright, like tanks of the ancient world. It was a dazzling, almost blinding sight in the harsh sunlight, a stark contrast to the simple hides and robes they had seen moments before. These psychological tactics were masterful. They didn't just aim to outfight the Romans, but to unnerve them, to shake their confidence before the first arrow was even loosed. Already on edge from the unfamiliar terrain and the strange tactics, the sight of the Parthian cavalry in their full splendor must have been a blow to the morale of Crassus' men. Initially, Crassus positioned his troops in a long, extended line with cavalry on both wings to avoid being surrounded. However, he reconsidered at the last moment and reorganized his forces into a square formation before advancing, likely to ensure the Roman army had strength on all fronts. Unaffected and with their typical iron discipline, the Romans locked their shields and braced for the charge. As the battle commenced, Crassus led his legions into the open plains. His strategy was straightforward. Use the overwhelming power of the legions to break through the Parthian lines where his legions would lock in combat with the enemy, expecting a traditional Roman battle. When Surenna saw the Romans' formation, deep and solid, shields locked together like a wall, he knew a head-on charge wouldn't work. So, he switched tactics on the fly. Instead of charging, Surenna ordered his horse archers to surround the sides of Crassus Square, while the cataphracts pulled back and regrouped. These highly skilled archers, who could shoot with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop, unleashed a relentless barrage of arrows. This tactic, known as the Parthian shot, allowed the archers to fire arrows accurately, even while retreating. Accustomed to handling arrow attacks, the Roman legions formed their renowned testudo, trusting that their heavy armor and shields would withstand the assault. However, it soon became evident that the unfamiliar barbed arrows and powerful compound bows used by the Parthians were alarmingly effective at piercing Roman defenses. Crassus' legions were heavily armored and less mobile. They were designed to hold ground and engage in hand-to-hand combat, and were unprepared for this kind of hit-and-run tactic. A brief attempt by the Roman light troops to disrupt the flanking maneuver was quickly thwarted by a barrage of arrows, compelling them to retreat back into the square. The Romans, used to fighting in more controlled environments with disciplined formations, found themselves outmaneuvered and outclassed in this unfamiliar landscape. The Parthians exploited this by staying well out of reach of the Roman infantry, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. Using their superior mobility to continuously harass the Roman soldiers. From the cover of sand dunes and rocky outcrops, arrows rained down from all directions, piercing through armor, striking soldiers who had nowhere to hide among the plains and no way to fight back. The Roman legions, tired and battered, but still hoping for a break in the relentless Parthian assault. Throughout the day, the Romans attempted to regroup and establish defensive positions. Roman infantry, armed with swords and shields, sallied forth in disciplined formations to counterattack and attempt to disrupt the Parthian maneuvers. In the meantime, they unleashed volleys of javelins or arrows in return. Crassus ordered Roman units to move forward in a manipular formation to advance and attempt to close the distance with the Parthian cavalry, break through Parthian lines, and create openings for exploitation. By this, Crassus sought to regain control of the battlefield initiative and impose Roman military discipline, forcing the Parthians into decisive engagements where Roman infantry superiority could be brought to bear. However, tightening their formation only made them easy targets again. The Parthian horse archers, with their fresh supply of arrows, began to rain death upon them once more. The cataphracts, with their greater reach and impenetrable armor, soon gained the upper hand. The Romans fought bravely, but they were packed closely together, couldn't defend themselves effectively, and suffered heavy casualties, like hitting a stone wall. Romans were trapped in a deadly stalemate, unable to advance or retreat effectively. They were being slowly picked apart by an enemy they couldn't catch. The clash was brutal. Upon the engagement of his elite heavy cavalry with the lightly armed Roman horsemen, the rejuvenated horse archers launched attacks on their flank and the approaching legionaries. Overwhelmed, the Romans, who were at a disadvantage, fled to a nearby hill and formed a defensive position, preparing for a courageous final defense. Publius, refusing to abandon his command, instructed one of his soldiers to end his life. With this act, all opposition on the hill crumbled. As the dust settled, Publius lay dead on the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of his men. This young man, who had fought so bravely, met his end in the distant, unforgiving plains of Carrhae. Meanwhile, at the main force, Crassus faced a crucial dilemma: retreat and abandon his son to certain death, or advance and risk his entire army to rescue him. He chose the latter course of action. They had not proceeded far when a cloud of dust and the rhythmic beat of war drums caught the Romans' attention. Following this ominous signal came the grim sight of Publius's head mounted on a lance. This horrific scene shattered Roman morale. Once again, Surenna employed his favored strategy. The cataphracts charged the Romans head-on while the horse archers encircled them, raining arrows on the square, and gradually wearing down the army until dusk halted the assault. As darkness descended upon Carrhae, the aftermath of battle was grim. The Parthians, having inflicted heavy losses on the Romans, withdrew to their nearby camps, leaving behind a devastated enemy. Of the 42,000 Roman troops that had marched into battle, only 20,000 remained combat-ready, with countless wounded and demoralized. Amidst the flickering campfires and weary faces of his men, Crassus and his senior officers, Cassius and Octavius, gathered to assess their options. They debated the perilous prospect of retreat under cover of night, weighed down by the uncertainty of their next move. With morale at its lowest and the shadow of Parthian supremacy looming large, they reluctantly chose to march towards Carrhae, leaving behind the wounded and vulnerable. The journey to Carrhae was fraught with tension and false alarms. The Romans, fearing further ambushes, remained on edge, ready to fight at any moment. But the night passed without major incident, and as dawn broke, approximately 15,000 weary soldiers sought refuge within the walls of Carrhae. The respite was brief. Surenna, the cunning Parthian commander, sensed the Romans' vulnerability and wasted no time tightening his grip. Skirmishes erupted along the Roman defenses, with Parthian horse archers darting in and out of range, inflicting more casualties on the exhausted Romans. Crassus, facing the stark reality of his dwindling options, made a desperate decision. He opted to parley with Surenna, hoping against hope for a negotiated peace that might salvage some dignity from their impending defeat. The meeting, however, ended in tragedy and betrayal. Crassus and his delegation were captured by the Parthians. The loss of their commander shattered what little resolve remained among the Romans. With Crassus gone, the remaining Roman forces fell into disarray. The aftermath was devastating. Few Romans managed to escape the massacre. Most were either killed or captured. But perhaps the most humiliating blow for Rome was the loss of their standards. These golden eagles, symbols of Roman honor and pride, were taken by the Parthians. It was a symbolic defeat that echoed back in Rome, a stark reminder of the disastrous campaign. According to historical accounts, Crassus was killed in a particularly humiliating manner. The Parthians, reputed for their disdain of Roman arrogance and wealth, allegedly poured molten gold down Crassus' throat as a symbol of his greed. This act not only signified his death, but also served as a stark reminder of the consequences of Roman ambition clashing with Parthian military prowess. That day at Carrhae was one of Rome's darkest hours. The Battle of Carrhae was more than just a military loss. This defeat became a symbol of Roman military hubris and the consequences of underestimating an opponent. It underscored the limitations of Roman power in distant, unfamiliar territories, showing that even the mightiest empire could falter when facing an enemy that used superior strategy and tactics. It was a lesson in the importance of adaptability and understanding, one as opponent lessons hard-learned in the sands of a distant battlefield. Crassus himself met a grim end, adding a tragic twist to his ambitious gamble. As the ancient strategist Sun Tzu wisely said, "Know thy enemy and know thyself." In 100 battles, you will never be defeated. For Rome, the repercussions were significant. The defeat at Carrhae not only shattered their immediate plans or expansion, but also highlighted the internal strains within the First Triumvirate. The First Triumvirate, already strained by political rivalries and ambitions, would soon unravel further with the deaths of Crassus and later Pompey, paving the way for Caesar's eventual dominance in Roman politics. Thus, the ill-fated Parthian campaign of Crassus not only reshaped Roman fortunes in the East, but also contributed to the dynamics that led to the fall of the Roman Republic.